As John said, I work within the School of Education, but in Researcher Education and Development. And I'm director of the RED unit, or Researcher Education and Development unit. And as you can see in our picture, using the metaphor of eating a cake, preparing a PhD is very challenging, particularly because PhD doesn't really have formal rubrics, formal assessments. So this is all about a project which we call Towards a Thesis Assessment Matrix, which is really an ongoing action research project that my colleague Lolita and I have worked on. There's a whole lot of literature about thesis assessment, and on the one hand it says there's stability, examiners always say the same sort of things for the same sort of level, but on the other hand, inexperienced examiners, fairly bad assessment if you compare it to masters or other coursework assessments. And there's always a problem is there a global research standard? Because often examiners come back to graduate centres and say, what is the standard? And you say, well, global standard, what is that? So we found within the literature tools to negotiate expectations between supervisors and students, taxonomies for reviewing literature, thesis rating scale, but a fairly undeveloped one, and of course the RSD. And that's on which we based our final work. We found that there was really no empirical basis for any of these tools, and that there was a lack of descriptive language, quality indicators, and that things tended to focus in on the sciences and traditional thesis formats. So we wanted to fix that. My colleague Lolita and I work in a program called the Integrated Bridging Program Research, where we work with predominantly international research students. And that was really the basis of what we were doing. So we wanted to create, first of all, thesis assessment discussion tools. We wanted it for supervisors, students, and potentially, eventually, examiners, to clarify expectations and assist in assessing research documents across the formats and also across the disciplines. I think we've got time. So we used action research, focusing on identification of an issue, development of theory, development of matrices, and then deployment and evaluation of these matrices. And we carried on with the process of refining. So our first matrix that developed was the research proposal assessment matrix. And I see some of our supervisors have had the pleasure of filling that in, which we used with students in the Integrated Bridging Program Research to look at their research proposal. Because initially we found that when supervisors were giving feedback on their students' research proposals, it tended to be either too critical or not sufficiently critical. So a lot of supervisors would say at the beginning of the research, oh, it's okay, it's fine, even if there's matters of language errors and even if it's not very clear. Whereas others were very hypercritical. So we were trying to set a standard and a way of looking at the research proposal documents. Over the last couple of years, we've used it with over 600 research students and their supervisors. And we've used it predominantly as a negotiation tool and an assessment tool. It's assessment in the sense of students finish their core components of the structured program, integrated bridging program elements. We try to assess this, and it was very successful. But when we tried to transfer it into the thesis, it was a lot more problematic. So we developed a draft research thesis assessment document, and we first deployed it with experienced supervisors at the University of Adelaide. We did this through an online survey. We gave it to students in thesis writing groups, and I also presented it at a postgraduate research conference in South Africa. And the students said, it's great to have something to take in and discuss my writing with my supervisor. It's scary, I'm still learning so much. It's a relief to see I'm okay, I'm just like my supervisor on a trajectory of development. And it really helped to see what is expected of a thesis. But even the students said it's a bit wordy. RSD has too many words in it, and your version also is too wordy. At the conference, they said it's too focused on the literature review and writing skills, which of course was, since it was a development from our research proposal assessment matrix, which focuses on that. And they said that the key element of research is the original contribution, and we need to focus more in on that. and also that it does not encapsulate the true work of the PhD, which is the original contribution. So that's just some of our data from our experienced supervisors who were in general pretty positive about it. But the key element that we lost some grades in is new examiners. And since that was our real focus, as we wanted to help new examiners, we thought, 22% are not happy with that. We need to really still work on this element. And from there, we got positive responses in clarifying expectations for research students, new supervisors, and new examiners, but also the high, strong disagree. And most were really positive about it as an aid in researcher training. So that took a little bit away from the examination focus, which we thought it might have some interest. So then we decided to move to our next phase of our action research project. And that involved us going in and looking at what are all the assessment advice that is provided to examiners by other universities. And we started in with the GO8, and then we started going in on all the universities like Oxford, Harvard, and so forth that are on the top Times ranking. This is just some positive comments from our experienced examiners at the University of Adelaide, that the criteria that we had coincided with established measures of adequacy, and that it was really helpful to see the progression, and it gave them an understanding of the levels of competency. But unfortunately, in terms of our descriptive comments, we also got some pretty negative comments from our experienced examiners. The assisting new examiners, the strongly disagree. The other thesis formats was particularly of concern to people in the creative disciplines. And the issue about differentiating between MPhil, doctorate, and PhD. A lot of people were neutral and said that that could potentially be problematic using the same assessment methods. I like this one at the ID 16 who said, if a supervisor doesn't know what is entailed in a thesis of a particular kind at a particular level, he or she should not be a supervisor. Well, I think we'd probably not have very many supervisors left at any university if that was the case. There was also an issue because we had, and those of you who come to the workshop, we have an excellence level. And that is really because at many universities, like the University of Adelaide, we have a Dean's Awards or University Awards for PhD, and that's what we wanted to put it in. But some people thought that that was problematic. Again, the creative theses and issues of design, data analysis, data interpretation, all of those were of an issue. So, as I said, we moved from there. I liked ID 10, who was negative on everything. Basically, in another comment, this person basically said that it was an absolute cheat for us to try and codify PhD examination because it was so special, so disciplined, and precious. How dare we try? And this person said, experienced examiners will dismiss it. Inexperienced examiners will be misled by it. But again, we got comments about the implicitly language-rich problems, which they felt that lay with the RSD and the whole language or lingua franca of the RSD, as my colleague found the engineers had problems with that too. So they wanted greater clarity through simplicity. And also the issue about the MPhil and that originality is slightly less important there that we needed to address in terms of differentiation. So we tried to refine it. And what we did, as I said before, we did an audit of reoccurring phrases that indicated quality and rigor in examiners' reports that we had access to. And we also did an audit of rubrics provided to Australian and international thesis examiners by institutions. And that's when we looked at all the top ranked institutions on the Times list and also the GO8s and what advice they were providing. And we tried to combine this into a revised assessment matrix. So for example, here's categories of phrases that we found from our review of the GO8s. So issues such as originality of approach or interpretation came up very strongly, as suggested by our previous data. And the issue of the thesis containing material worthy of publication became a big issue as well. And that we'll explore a little bit more in the workshop later on. So, the issue of knowledge contribution was really important. Words such as substantial, original, and so forth kept on reoccurring. Significant contribution, distinct contribution. So the word contribution was pretty uniform, but all the language around it was completely different from the different institutions. New perspectives or advanced knowledge and so forth. So you can just see, even with the GO8s, all this variation in language that we saw. And also with the masters, sound knowledge makes a contribution, not really specifying how big or how small. Appreciation of topics displays new perspectives, demonstrates advanced learning, and so forth. So a whole lot of different language to basically say the same thing. And that's why we found it was really difficult to codify all this language. But we have now put it all together in a new revised version of the thesis matrix. And we believe that there are potential advantages, that supervisors can get a clear articulation of expectations and standards, that examiners might have a more fair, transparent, and consistent evaluation, and that students might have clear goals and direction. And just personally, I have used it myself now with 3 PhD examinations, and I found it was quite useful. One element that I'm in the process of deciding whether to take out or not, is we had little tick boxes, and more I felt, no, it's not necessary, maybe we should take that out when I was examining a PhD. There's a whole variety. But, of course, there's always a caution. I know when I suggested it to the Graduate Centre, they got quite excited, and I know supervisors are worried because they might be hijacking by rampant managerialists or administrators, and trying to pin down the ephemeral is also tricky. So our next step is to continue onwards and audit more and more examiners' reports, and also to try and get more and more of you to try it out in your own thesis examination processes. Thank you very much.